Hello, everybody. My name is Kelsey Nanan, and I'm a freelance data viz developer. Apologies. I hope everybody's doing well out there. I am a little under the weather today, so, going to do my best to get through, but really sorry if I might seem a little bit, lower energy than usual to my couple friends who know me out there. So I'm a freelance data viz developer. And I've previously worked in data viz development at McKinsey's Data Visualization Lab and at a small startup called Revelio Labs. Today, I'm going to talk about how we could all build better together by collaborating beyond our roles. In my time developing, I've realized that when we as developers work closely with other people on different teams or with different roles, and when everybody goes just a little bit beyond what their role may traditionally call for, we can unlock a lot of potential. And eventually, we accomplish the general aim of effective data viz, telling the right story in the best way. So today, I'm going to touch on 4 outcomes of collaboration: creativity, efficiency, accessibility, and inspiration. And I'm going to do this through various projects that I've worked on to describe how me and my team arrived at the right story and solution. Starting off with what I've coined these cycles of creativity: developer-led and designer-led. So when people with different skill sets, right, inspire and are inspired by the work of the other, creativity flourishes. And we get these really great cycles of building off of others' progress. And we can arrive at really custom and unique solutions for difficult problems. Here, I'll be talking about a project that I built in Observable framework called Streets to Stability. This was a report that describes the complexity of the homelessness ecosystem in San Francisco, the impact on various players in the system, and ways to rethink the current state. So at the beginning of the project, the research team had already collected and put together this really large data set of the players and relationships in the homelessness space. These players were mainly service providers who help people experiencing homelessness and the departments who fund those service providers. And the team here, basically, their ultimate goal was to get across the messiness of this current system and the need for simplification, particularly for those actually experiencing homelessness. They had created what you're looking at here, a version of a network chart in Miro, and this was our team's jumping off point. So we gathered inspiration for our mood board from large network charts, that were trying to show large entities similar to what we were trying to do. And then we began this developer-led creative cycle, which starts off by prototyping in code. Typically, we would try to prototype using a high-level tool, right, that gets you the shape of the data very quickly. We then iterate in the design phase, and then you kind of begin development in earnest when you know a little bit more about what you're trying to get. For this particular visualization, we flipped that script, partly because we had the time to just sketch and play around in code, which I always love doing, and partly because these fancy sort of network charts you're seeing couldn't really be easily created with high-level tools. So for this first iteration with D3, I basically just tested out using radial scales to position text groups of the various players in our ecosystem. And what you're seeing here is a riff on the D3 radial bar chart, but each bar is a constant height, and we're still getting that nice radial orientation of these text labels. And after prototyping in code, being able to very quickly deploy this work in progress code. And here we're using framework, so we just npm deployed to Observable Cloud, and being able to quickly do this so that others could see these rough early prototypes and give feedback was incredibly crucial. Because then with just this little bit of code and a live link, our designer immediately just exported those rough prototypes as SVGs and then started iterating in Figma to kind of refine the first version in code. And here begins, these lovely cycles of creativity with everybody, playing around, giving feedback, including our wonderful stakeholder friends annotating here on Zoom, right? And that's the beauty of the early quick deploy and having the live link. The project then becomes real for everybody, and it allows for very useful feedback at every point in the process. So this is the final visualization from this process. Something that was, unique, eye-catching, definitely gets across the complexity of the system and allows for, connection with the data by further interacting to see individual departments and service providers. And we also created a couple versions where you can see the crippling number of options facing a fictional persona, here it's Yara, at any single step of their homelessness journey. This is the web that people experiencing homelessness have to navigate, right? Along with being homeless in and of itself. And what we were trying to get across with this, kind of complex like web network chart. Okay, so that was the beginning of the project where we had the time to, do this developer-led creative cycle and prototype in code. And then fast forward to 1 week before launch, where we got some feedback that maybe the website is a little bit too text heavy with some very policy specific jargon that might alienate the general public coming to this website. So now we're flipping the direction, and this is my designer-led creative cycle, which is very close to a kind of typical process where design precedes development. But here, because of our time crunch, the design phase now needs to happen with a development-centric mindset, which it always should, but, only a week here. So, asking the question, what is realistic to get done in the time that we have that will still achieve the goal? And the client's goal, was basically, how do we contextualize this dense information for the general public and grab their attention from the offset? And our developer-centric mindset is aimed at reducing developer effort by reusing existing assets and recycling code where possible. So what exactly do I mean by that? This is the solution that the team came up with. It basically consists of a splash screen right when you enter the website, and then when dismissed, it sends you into this scrolly telling story that sets the stage of the website in layman's term and gives the so what, why should you care about this issue? So we're reusing a couple assets here. One very familiar, we're using our network chart and basically just, grabbing the public's attention with this crazy network chart that, we did spend a lot of time working on and that ended up being a couple pages into the website. So now we're bringing it kind of front and center. And this is the animated version of it, of course. Our scrolly telling spans horizontally across this lovely illustration of San Francisco that we'd actually had commissioned as a header for another page on the website. So here we're again bringing this lovely asset that someone spent so much time creating. We're bringing this to the forefront and zooming in on all of these like lovely details that were, so thoughtfully added by our illustrator. I think you can see here someone pushing a homelessness cart and then two people taking a selfie in front of a bridge in San Francisco. So reusing these wonderful assets definitely kind of brought new life to them. And then in terms of kind of recycling code, we'll talk here about the splash screen, this one, because this kind of surprised me in some ways. So the designer-led cycle, it seems very close, like it seems very typical to how you typically kind of design and develop. But it surprised me when we were going through this process. And I think that's because sometimes as developers, we almost have tunnel vision about how a design should be implemented. And that's fair. It's because when we're looking at a design, maybe subconsciously we're kind of thinking, okay, like, how are we going to implement this? What are going to be some roadblocks, right? But someone who might be a little bit more removed from the code and may not know the specific ways that things are like working on your website, sometimes that almost gives a more bird's eye view, a more holistic idea of what could be possible. And that's exactly what happened here. So our splash screen, when we were first conceiving of it, I'm thinking, is this a separate page? We're creating a new page. How do you get back and forth from the website to the splash screen? And our designer was literally just like, could we just use a modal? And we'd already implemented modals elsewhere in the website to kind of, remove some of all of that text from the main page of the website. But we had this code already. So we just basically restyled the modal to kind of look full screen, stuck this video in, and here we have our splash screen. So really kind of, taking some quick kind of steps here, which is very crucial at this point. But yeah, I did not think of this. This was our designer in this designer-led creative cycle. And, I was like, yeah, it's less work for me. I'll put it in a modal. So in these two creative cycles, we basically have a designer or a developer, each moving a little bit closer to the other's domain, coding something with an eye towards creativity and styling and prototyping, or designing something while considering its implementation. And that's the main takeaway of this first point around creativity. Go beyond the role where you can, and I believe that's where the magic happens. And that's where you come up with these really creative solutions. Moving on to efficiency and getting a little bit more specifically technical here. To me, efficiency means getting more done with the time and resources that you have. In other words, help your team to help you. And here I'm going to talk about that same Streets to Stability project, but a slightly different angle. So we saw the beginning of the project with, we had the time to prototype in code. We saw the mad rush at the end to kind of, create that new landing page. But in the middle, after we first kind of created the network chart, the team started thinking about doing more than just showing the messiness of the current state. They started pushing towards, well, what could a future state look like? And in this process, they came up with these 12 data-driven policy recommendations for tackling homelessness in San Francisco. And this became an entire policy page on the website with tons of information. We had 12 very detailed policy recommendations, each containing multiple sets of items, and some of these containing more sets of items. Understandably so, this is aimed at being incredibly actionable. And, for that reason, these recommendations also had to be incredibly accurate. And because of that, they were also, constantly being adjusted, and like the text was being, really nitpicked through. And for that reason, we wanted to give the research team very full and very precise control over these policy recommendations. But at the same time, we didn't want to use developer time to be copy pasting text from the Google Doc, which is what you're seeing here, into the website. So to solve this, we used framework data loaders to transform, instead of the Google Doc, spreadsheets that the research team could edit as needed to the nested structure that the code required. And a data loader is just a function. You put in the effort to write it once, and then the research team can nitpick and adjust the text as much as they want. They update in the spreadsheet, and then those updates flow through whenever you re-upload these various data sets. So much less effort than trying to, copy text to the right place. And the subject matter experts could worry about the subject matter, and you as the designer developer worry about the story and kind of, all of that lovely technical stuff. Okay, so zooming in on a few of these policy recommendations. A few of them contained charts, and most of these we spun up in observable notebooks. At this point in the project, we're working under the constraints of having a single designer and developer, and we needed to use our time wisely. So inputs here kind of bridge the designer-developer gap. And I see them in some ways as empowering designers to make and see their changes, like their design changes, in the actual visualization without having to send in requests to tweak colors or change back colors or, changing the radii of circles. This worked nicely for our use case because here we were simply exporting these static images from notebooks to upload to our website. I admit for other use cases where maybe your code is in another final production environment that doesn't link to your notebook, the inputs may not work as well. But it's nice to kind of have this playground in a sense, right? For a designer to get instant feedback on design tweaks. I see it as, a big win for productivity. So this is the final outcome of that policy page. We have the recommendations with the information nested within them, some of them available in modals that you can click to see more. And thinking about efficiency, there are some tools that we sometimes think of as developer tools, right? Notebooks are very code heavy. Data loaders are probably primarily seen as, data engineering tools. But when we figure out how to use these tools with non-developers, I think we could save a lot of time and effort on our part, right? No need to do absolutely everything yourself. Okay, so inter-team collaboration was absolutely invaluable for my next few points on accessibility. This was another project where we worked with Perkins School for the Blind to create a website that showcased research about the underdiagnosis of CVI in children across the US. CVI stands for cortical visual impairment, a brain-based visual impairment that is the leading cause of blindness and low vision in children. And as the first school for the blind in the US, Perkins was committed to adhering to the highest level of accessibility on their website. On this slide is what I sometimes consider my North Star of accessibility, which I got from them. Content cannot be visible alone, but should be an equivalent experience for all users. We created a series of bivariate maps where the user could identify high-risk areas, essentially those where we had a high number of children with CVI who might be going undiagnosed and where they may be lacking necessary resources. And our goal was to provide the closest equivalent experience of these maps to keyboard users, screen reader users, or users that were somehow otherwise impaired. But keep in mind, these were very complex maps, right? They're at the county level. So we have over 3,000 counties. They could also be filtered, hovered over, and they had multiple layers per map. So to achieve our goal here and tell this story in the best way for our target audience, we needed the expertise of multiple teams, right? not only using the best design principles and pushing our development capabilities, but considering accessibility needs from those who were experts in the field. And for this expertise, we worked closely with the Perkins Access team. They provided lots of feedback and guidance periodically as we went along. And they also provided examples of accessible data visualizations. And you could see one of these examples here. This is a line chart where the underlying data is made available in a table that can be navigated easily by keyboards and screen reader users. So this here was our starting point. And we began in the design phase by forking one of the many, I think, bivariate map examples in observable notebooks, just to kind of quickly see our data, quickly see, does this type of visualization actually make sense? And we got feedback from the client. They absolutely loved it. They wanted to go in that direction. They wanted multiple bivariate maps. On the other hand, the limitations that we encountered here were perhaps unsurprising when it comes to notebooks. The lack of full styling control, especially of these inputs, the question of getting your code from a notebook to your final production environment. In this case, it was the Perkins WordPress website. And additionally, we found out that the default table here had an infinite scroll. And we learned that this was essentially a big no-no in accessibility. Tables should ideally be paginated so that a keyboard or a screen reader user doesn't get stuck in, I think the phrase was tab doom, right? They're using a keyboard to navigate the entire website and they get stuck tabbing through the table with no way to escape and move on to the rest of the page until you get to the end of the table. So this was not going to fly with Perkins Access. And to solve all of these problems, we got very familiar with Observable's exported runtime code. And this is, I promise, maybe my most technical slide. So that exported runtime code is, kind of when you're embedding your iframe into another website and the iframe code is referencing a JavaScript file somewhere else, and you don't worry about that JavaScript file. We went to the source of that JavaScript file. That's what you're seeing here. We downloaded that and basically kind of combed through it to adjust what we got from the notebook to suit our needs. So specifically, I've highlighted the CVI filter function, which gives the value of the filter in the notebook. And the idea was to connect this value to our external accessible table so that the data in the table would reflect the data in the map. And you'll see this in a couple slides. And I also realized how crazy this sounds, by the way. Okay, in addition to this accessible table, which we grabbed using the data tables library, we also included descriptive ARIA labels for the maps. And this is basically embedded in the underlying HTML code. So if you're looking at a website, you won't really see this, but this underlying HTML code is what screen readers use to basically describe a website to someone who's visually impaired. So we included descriptions of the maps as ARIA labels for screen readers. And within the body of the page itself, we also included summary text. And the goal of this summary text was to describe patterns on the map. This was created by our data experts and helpful for those who are visually impaired in giving a bit closer of that equivalent experience to the map, right? That's our goal. And perhaps giving a bit closer of the equivalent experience than perhaps like the pure data in the data table would. So that was the goal of this summary text. For this project, we definitely pushed the envelope with accessible data viz, acknowledging that it's a developing field and we didn't have time to implement absolutely everything that we wanted to. But we did increase our knowledge in this field very much. And that was only possible through, again, these collaborative cycles of feedback from accessibility experts, as well as, the willingness of both our design and our development teams to push beyond their own specialties as well. Okay, now I'm going to get much, much more out of the technical weeds here to finish up with my thoughts on how collaboration fosters inspiration. As has probably been pretty clear by now, I've been very inspired by the immensely talented designers and developers and various teams that I've worked with. But I've also been just as inspired by fellow developers that I've never met. So I want to touch a bit now on indirect collaboration over time at both a high design level and like a lower level, more granular, like technical effort. And, this section is basically a shout out to those open source like tools and libraries that in a lot of ways do a lot of heavy lifting for us so that we can go beyond our roles. And here I'm going to talk through a personal project I worked on this year that I called the Tortured Data Viz Department. Essentially a combination of my own personal data that I collected on Taylor Swift's newest album, as well as some more kind of objective data around the album. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, and in a couple slides, you'll see why that's funny. Because I've talked about observable notebooks a lot. But hey, I'm going to say it a little bit more overtly. I think that the beauty of observable notebooks is that it's a tool that can let both designers and developers go a little bit beyond their roles. I actually started using observable notebooks because a designer that I worked very closely with used them a lot to prototype. And she's the one who, in that design prototype phase for Perkins, forked and customized the code for that bivariate map before I'd, even like explored the code in the notebook or exported it to kind of explore it more. And this is the high level inspiration of notebooks, right? From all these extensive galleries of examples, you can browse and fork to quickly get from data to viz. From a designer's perspective, maybe you get like a little bit closer to the code, but a lot's already done for you. You don't have to get in the weeds. And then from a developer's perspective, like my own, it gives you a starting point of code to work from, which is sometimes much easier than staring at a blank page and creating something entirely from scratch. And then you have the freedom, right, to customize at the code level, unlike some other, maybe more truly high-level data viz tools. And as a developer, you then kind of get the headspace to focus on the more creative aspects of your work. So what I'm going through here is my process of customizing Observable's radial stacked bar chart to pay tribute to an album that became very dear to my heart this year, Taylor Swift's Tortured Poets Department. And I was just as inspired by the music of this album as by my physical record itself. So this was my like creative vision that I realized, I could get from, observable stacked radial bar chart to something that literally looks like the record that I own and listen to countless times. So that process of customizing code that got me from, radial bar chart to this like artsy visualization, that's the other end of what I think of as the inspiration spectrum, right? Low-level, granular code inspiration. And this kind of stuff, it won't create a chart from scratch for you, but it's what helps you finesse that more general code that you start out with. And I feel, like developers on this call would definitely know what I'm talking about. It's those articles and libraries that you're always referencing to do that one thing. And it's because some other developer at some point in time realized, hey, this is an opportunity, and went above and beyond to not only solve the problem, but create a solution that others could use, right? To help us all be more efficient in our own work. And, definitely the beauty of open sourcing and sharing what you've learned. Hey, I've just kind of grabbed a few of my favorite examples, two of which I used in the Taylor Swift Viz. So we have Suzy Liu's D3 Legend Library. Tired of making legends for your data visualizations? Me too. Enjoy. Nadi Brahma, one of her many kind of explanations and tutorials about something that's really technically specific. And hey, it's animating a dashed line. And Ben Tannen's kind of take on the SVG wrapping function, right? I always dread having to implement text wrapping in D3. Preach. So again, using these existing solutions to get your work to where you want it to be without having to focus on those specifics. When I was thinking about inspiration, the inspiration I get from collaborating indirectly with these, I guess influencers is a good word, right? Like I don't actually know them, but I feel like I know their work so well. I thought a useful way to put it is, you're standing on the backs of giants who solved problems so you don't have to, so that you could go beyond and create some fun thing that you want to create. Then I realized I was being pretty romantic. And maybe a more practical and efficient way to put it is why rebuild the wheel? But, both equally valid. So essentially, what I want to say is going that extra mile in collaboration, whether it's stepping outside the comfort zone of your role a little bit, or bringing in non-data viz teams into your process, or using and even extending solutions that others have made usable and available. That's where we arrive at these creative, inspiring solutions to tell the right story in the best way. Thank you so much for listening.